am a slave.
Yes, it's true. I am reading Karl Marx. But my first venture into the politics and murky waters of far lefts to ascertain whether they will be valuable allies to us or as Muslims has hit more than a few bumpy roads. And I wanted to actually talk about those bumpy roads because people don't actually realise how incredibly kryptonite certain parts of conversations you can't have with the radical or far left inside as a Muslim kind of mindset. And I've already come to this roadblock. I have been in correspondence with somebody that has led me towards getting the Communist Manifesto to actually start having conversations about leftist politics and about leftist politics in general. And right off the bat, where I'm using articulated conversations, there is a good backwards and forwards. I have found that the minute you bring up one small, tiny section of the homosexual community, the conversation doesn't turn toxic, it turns dead. To the point where you are blocked, you are cut off all communications, no explanations given why, and no ability to articulate the problem is. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about maps. I'm talking about the fact that the far left refuse to even have a conversation to explain their position upon maps. And the reason I say this is because a conversation I had involving that was leading to articulate, and I'm not gaslighting, I may not have been very, very well articulated at the time of night. I was quite tired when I was trying to emphasize my conversation about maps and where the far left's view on it comes from. And in retrospect, that's probably more of a club-headed foot of my problems. That's, there is some blame to me on that regard. But when you try to have this conversation, I have found on more than one occasion, more than the individual I was talking to in earnest about socialist movements, the reality sits that conversations around minor attracted people, if you're all wondering what maps are, paedophilia, being inside the gay community, homosexual, LGBTQ plus community, and their inability to even have this conversation is an unresolvable problem in the far left. And in fact, the far left don't even want to talk about it. It's starkly telling that they consider it homophobic to want to have a conversation. When you shut down dialogue, when you cut off dialogue, you give your opponent the munitions to run the conversation. Do you understand me, those of you on the far left, as I dip my toe in Karl Marx and I observe the politics of what you would like people to observe and explore it? The reality that you're holding, if you are unwilling to have a conversation, you see, we're Muslims, we're told to defend terrorism. We're told to defend grooming gangs. We're told to defend absolutely everything and the shitbags that are thrown at us on a daily, regular, hourly basis. Terrorist attack goes on, Muslims are asked the question. Sexual grooming gang goes on, Muslims are asked the question. Knife attack goes on, Muslims are asked the question. It's unreal. A mufti has said something inappropriate, Muslims are asked the question. But you ask one question about the far left, specifically about the internal information that I've mentioned of maps, and they shut you down. They do not even want to have the conversation. So, I mean, what was I leading to that didn't get articulated because the live was ended, the conversation was shut down, the entire raison d'etre on TikTok ended without any conversation. And the person I was talking to is highly intelligent and very articulate, and I have a great deal of respect for them in terms of their articulation and intelligence. But my goal was, why were maps allowed to have a platform? Who funded the books specifically about the transgender woman that I'm going to link in this bio? And on what platform does she continue to articulate herself and the gay community's refusal to even engage the conversation? So I want to mention this towards, in earnest, in general earnest as a human being, why does the homosexual far left community refuse to have a conversation around maps? It's like you can't even talk about it. But yet, not only are they attempting to assert themselves towards the far left, and specifically towards the gay community, but in doing the removal and refusal to do so, you grant the narrative to the far right. You literally give it to them. And my point is, if you can't have an earnest, neutral conversation with somebody about the subject, and yes, I was leading up to that, and that's where my articulated problem came into goals. It was a horrible time in the morning, and it was like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and I was very tired, and I didn't articulate myself very well, and that's a flaw to me. That's a flaw to me. I don't think the people who are involved in this will ever see the video, but if they do, in all earnest, I still think very highly of that individual. But let me be very, very clear. If you cannot sit down and have a conversation about delicate subjects, you give the narrative to your opponents. You literally, it's like a gift. It's like a socialistic failure to acknowledge that you don't want to have that conversation. And you've allowed people like Ben Shapiro and that lot to run away with it. And I don't even like fucking Ben Shapiro. I think the man's a troll. And people like Peter Jordanson and the Live Wire and Josh Rogan, I think his name is, the podcasters, and Andrew fucking Tate, a walking fitna in the Ummah. You give ammunition to these people because you refuse to have the conversation on who gave the platforms to these people, who allowed them to write their books, who allowed these transgender people to have these, because it's specifically a transgender professor who wrote a book and spoke rather publicly about minor attracted people, about how they want their sexuality spoken about. That had to come from somewhere. And it came within the gay community, I can guarantee you it, the homosexual community. And the problem being is, when you want to have that conversation in an adult format, no one on the left wants the conversation. Or when they do, they want to unequivocally deny that it has anything to do with them. They unequivocally want to deny it has anything to do with them. And yet Muslims have to defend absolutely everything. So my conclusion to my beautiful and beloved brothers and sisters on this app, who specifically YouTube, who follow my page and recognise my page for what it is, I do not believe we can earnestly sit down and talk to the radical left. They are still the lesser evil of the two parties here in the UK, of the Labour and Tory party, but you can't have an earnest conversation with them. Because when you attempt and you start picking up the frayed areas like, the right said this and the right said that, they don't defend it, they shut the conversation down. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That is my foray, if you like, into the radical left, because it is clearly probably the end of my conversation on that matter, simply because of their inability in any way, shape or form to have a conversation about difficult topics. I mean, from what I've read of Karl Marx, I don't think the man would run from these conversations. And I've said this about capitalists as well, when I say I'm an Adam Smith capitalist. I say feudal corporatism would despise Adam Smith because he would try to break the companies, because he believes in the freedom of enterprise. And there is no freedom of enterprise under the current corporate feudalism. You see, many of the people that people hold on pedestals, Karl Marx, Adam Smith, Charles Darwin, many of these people they put on pedestals would be horrified by today's society, by their lack of ability to engage this in a conversation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for coming back for this. It's not my normal content. I will be getting back to the prophet stories very, very shortly, probably over this weekend. And it's been a pleasure having you all. Have a lovely day.
I am a slave.